Been really heavily involved in the mobile industry for a long time. Many of you may know him from working on MeeGo with him. He also recently joined Rovio, the Angry Birds company, as the Bad Piggy Bank manager. That means he's developing their virtual economy. This is a guy who really knows the mobile space, and he's here to share his top 10 list of what he's heard around San Francisco here from you guys related to MeeGo. So come on out, Julian, let's hear what your top 10 MeeGo stories are for today.
Glad to be here to represent the community. During the warm-up this weekend, we asked you, the community, what MeeGo is. The category today is top 10 definition of MeeGo. Number 10, MeeGo is in netbooks, in tablets, in cars, in smartphones, of course. MeeGo is mobile. It's in TV too. Number 9, MeeGo is exciting. Come on guys, cheer up for MeeGo. Oh. Number 8, MeeGo is flexible. Definitely more than me. And don't worry, you'll get back there, Jim. But also like these birds. MeeGo is super cool. Come on, catch it. Number 6, MeeGo is empowering. Developers rule. Number 5, pushing experiences beyond imagination. MeeGo is inspiring. Number 4, MeeGo is a world of opportunities. Be proactive. Engage with the community. Number 3, MeeGo is evolving. Just look at the mailing list. Number 2, MeeGo is open. Have you ever played Werewolf with CEOs, CTOs, and more? Well, just come tonight at the Hackers Lounge. And finally, the number 1 definition of what MeeGo is here in San Francisco. MeeGo is love, courage, and change. Thank you very much.
Before I bring out our first guest, I want to let you all know that we'll be taking questions at several points this morning. So to submit a question to the stage, just post it to Twitter or Identica. Be sure to use the hashtags that are up here on the screen, MeeGoComp or KeyNoteQ. And I will be getting them up here on the tablet, so hopefully we'll be able to take a few audience questions as we go through the day. So we have a bunch of people that I want all of you to hear from today, and we really have a great lineup of people from all over the different sectors that MeeGo is working with. One of our guests unfortunately wasn't able to make it today, something about fire, but we do have a great set of speakers that are going to come in today. And our first speaker is really someone that will give us a broader industry view. She's a leading analyst of the digital marketplace at IDC. She's the vice president of their consumer brand and digital marketplace service, and one of the leading people that are watching things like gaming, TV, research, home networking, and more. You've probably seen her quoted in media outlets like the Wall Street Journal, commenting on how changes are happening in IT and consumer digital marketplaces. So let's welcome IDC's Danielle Levitas. Come on out. So Danielle, you kind of watch the industry from a real broad perspective at IDC. You guys work with really everybody in the industry. And the big question that I think is on a lot of people's minds today is, how is open source doing in this new digital consumer marketplace out there?
The consumer market is such a great, diverse market in terms of, you have home opportunities, you've got mobile opportunities, and I think when you take a look specifically at open source, what's happening today, the PC desktop market had been dominated for so long by closed systems and still is. And in the last 2 years, if you look at the smartphone market in particular, there's just been an explosion in terms of open source and Linux specifically, its variants in this segment. So last year, of those 300 million global smartphone shipments, about 1 out of 4 of those devices were based on Linux. This year we'll see a growth of about 50%, 450 million, and by the end of our forecast period, 2015, 1 out of every 2 smartphones, so more than 900 million, 1 out of 2 of those will be based on open source and on Linux. And I think that just speaks volumes, literally, in terms of just this amazing platform that gives OEMs, application developers, as well as service providers, a whole new way to monetize this huge opportunity.
Right. I mean, it's really tough to make market share predictions in the future or try and figure out what volumes are. But I mean, even if you just ballpark this one, it's definitely impressive growth for open source. I think probably based on some of the fundamentals that I just talked about previously.
Absolutely. I mean, even if you now look at the extension of the tablet market. So tablets, last year, obviously its first year, less than 20 million shipments. This year we see the market growing to about 50 or just over 50 million shipments globally. And the reality is there's not going to be enough room for multiple closed ecosystems, and that's where we really see open source giving real competition, more innovation, not sort of leaving it to just a couple of vendors to frankly define the space.
Right. When you're talking to people and talking about these changes in device landscape and the different platforms that are out there, what are you seeing in terms of, are there any frustrations? Are people frustrated because they don't interoperate as well? Is there any particular trend that you're seeing as this massive shift in moving around is taking place in the device landscape?
I mean, the reality is today most people still view their devices as functioning independently, even though they're increasingly networked. I think over the next 3 to 5 years that completely flip-flops, and consumers will absolutely demand, call it, themes around multi-screen, having content services applications that follow them in a logical way from screen to screen. We're increasingly owning more and more devices. They're increasingly networked and not sort of these standalone independent devices. If you think about sort of install-based consumer devices that are connected, which is the graphic that we're showing you here, in the case of television as an example, so more than 100 million HD TV shipping in markets like North America, Western Europe, Japan, networking is now free in these devices, but they're really used as islands. They're rarely even used in a connected fashion, let alone interacting with other devices. Over the next 5 years, that completely changes. And I think that's where platforms like MeeGo that were designed to support a 4-inch screen or 40-plus inch screen and give those end users a better experience will really open up opportunities for new competitors. Again, from not just the OEM side, but also from the services and applications standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, the thing I love about that visual that you just showed is the expansion in just the number of categories of devices and those markets growing overall in terms of volume. And I think this is what makes it tough to try and figure out who's going to win and who's going to not win is, in any of those categories, there could be something that, we've never even heard of today emerging. What do you hear from people in terms of how they're actually addressing those new segments? Are they using things like MeeGo, and what are the reasons that they're using them?
So from the standpoint of expansion, so that graphic was install-based consumer devices, and specifically for PCs, for what it's worth, it's about 55% of PC shipments are consumer, and that's what was shown there. In addition to all those other device categories. I mean, up until a couple years ago, who would have predicted tablets being, sort of the thrill that they've been for the industry? We absolutely haven't even scratched the surface. Over the next, really even 2 years, I think we're going to see a ton of experimentation around form factor, different UI and input mechanisms, the role of gestures, the role of voice, etc. And that's where I think taking advantage of the open source community so that you can get access to different APIs and baseline technologies that allow you to innovate on top of that, and frankly not worry about all the lower layers, and being able to understand that developing for a slider-based device, so something that maybe is a touch screen, but if you maneuver the screen, there is a different input mechanism and so forth. I mean, this kind of innovation, who can realistically get to market except for a couple of really big companies that own the stack, from the basemost hardware and silicon all the way up to the software. A lot of that innovation needs to happen in terms of the open source community and taking advantage of the tools out there, and frankly the innovation at the higher levels to make these experiences optimized based on the customer segment, based on a vertical. It's not just about consumer.
Right. It's interesting, we just got a question from the audience, because, we've painted a pretty rosy picture in terms of how open source and projects like MeeGo are growing. This question was, as MeeGo and Linux become more common, so do unfortunately GPL violations. I'm not sure if you hear much about this. I definitely do. The question is there a plan to handle it? Now, I can probably answer this question, and then I'd love to hear your opinion on it. I think it's true. As open source and Linux become widely used, you'll hear every once in a while about a GPL violation. And what we have done at the Linux Foundation is built an entire mechanism to deal with license compliance. So for the folks who asked about GPL violations, what I can really describe to you is a landscape where license compliance is just an everyday part of business. And that when you see a GPL violation out there, it's usually an unintentional violation that is quickly resolved by a number of mechanisms. The first mechanism is we have a rapid response place at the Linux Foundation where GPL violations can be reported, where we can connect people with the companies who actually have those violations, and where they can correct those violations by providing a written offer or access to the source code very, very quickly. In addition to that, what you're seeing is the entire economy of the IT industry pooling behind an effort to provide license compliance up and down their entire supply chain. Last summer, we announced our Open Compliance Program, which involves training, which involves a best practices set of checklists, which involves our rapid response system. That's really helping solve all of these GPL license issues, and really, frankly, any license issues around open source. So what I think is going to happen over the next few years, because it's actually very easy and well understood to comply with open source licenses, there's really no controversy from a legal perspective in terms of how to actually utilize this software, because the business benefits of the software are so overwhelming, as you've just shown, that license compliance is really just this housekeeping footnote that the industry really wants to handle, that you're really not going to see these, that you're going to see an industry that self-governs very effectively around license compliance in partnership with the community, so that these things sort of go away and people get access to the source code for licensing terms when it's applicable, and people will generally comply with these licenses. So that's the quick question. I don't know if you hear from folks whether or not this is a big concern to them. I think it might be something that maybe this audience is particularly interested in.
I think this audience clearly would be particularly interested. I'm with you. I think as long as there's sort of a reasonable mechanism to get resolution. I think where it gets tricky though is where there's offenders, unintentional or not, that are sort of within a local market, and it's a long time before it's even found out, kind of a thing. And I think that's where it gets tricky, where there's a local, a single market or a few markets, and it doesn't get discovered until, many moons later.
Yeah. I think those things, again, would be sort of a thing of the past. I mean, honestly, I hear about this from just a small group of folks. What I generally hear is license compliance is something that we willingly want to do, and the business benefits and overwhelming benefits of using this collaborative development process are so huge compared to the tiny cost of actually complying with the license. That's really not an issue, and I think that issue is going to fade to be a thing of the past and just a common practice of the industry. So I thought for, now that we've heard sort of a broader industry perspective, that we might bring somebody out and you and I can discuss with them a different segment of the industry, and a very specific segment of the industry that a lot of people in the MeeGo project are working on. The next person that I'm going to bring out is a acknowledged leader in both IT and the automotive sectors. He worked as a general manager at NEC many years ago, where he really created some of the first open standards compliant products in the Japanese PC marketplace. Things like PCs, video on demand, digital set-top boxes, and others. He started several internet ventures on his own prior to working at the company he's at today. But today he's really the driving force at Nissan Motor. where he's helping leading the adoption of IT technology for the next generation of Nissan vehicles out there. Among the many kinds of services that he's implemented, he's done the IT infrastructure for electric vehicles, and he's one of the leading advocates for new telematics systems in automotives. There are few people around the world that are more deeply involved in the convergence of automotive engineering and computing than our next guest, who's Nissan's Chief Service Architect and Program Director, Sugio Nobe. Mr. Nobe, come on out. So I know a lot of people are excited to hear from you today. I mean, I think cars are something that everyone can relate to, particularly here in the United States. And Nissan is obviously one of the cutting edge companies in terms of automobiles.
Yes.
The Leaf has got all the buzz here in California as you're starting to roll out sales here in the US. And Nissan's really known as this customer-driven, really innovative automaker. I thought I would start, before we get to talking about open source and MeeGo, have you just describe in general, what are the challenges that the automotive industry is having today around computing, around auto infotainment?
Okay. Of course, the customers' demand has been always changing, and also recently many devices like smartphones would be used by the general customers and in a daily life. And once the vehicle is now connected to the network, we have to prepare for that. So that we have to implement quite flexible system inside the vehicle to make connection of the vehicle to the network. Yes, maybe that is the kind of challenges and changes recently we see.
Right. How is the software component of the car changing today? I mean, you know, if you look just back a few years, the smartphone industry has just completely changed, right? From, you know, sort of this feature phone world to a phone where you do all sorts of computing on it. Yes. Are we seeing a similar change?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Basically, even the smartphone or mobile phone, those are embedded systems in the past. And historically, the vehicle IT have been proprietary and embedded systems. But recently, the hardware and software resources have been increasing or expanded a lot, which is same with the smartphone. So that is kind of changes, and yeah, we have to comply with that.
Right. Is it so? You know, like smartphones, are cars now coming with a bigger memory footprint, faster processors, more demand for, you know, consumer services in the car through the infotainment units? I mean, how big is that change for you at Nissan?
Yeah, even for example, the programming code is like a kind of 5 million lines, so that it's huge. So we have to manage. If we have a kind of proprietary systems, we make it by ourselves. But if we can comply with the open source systems, we can use kind of modulated softwares and use or define or such kind of things. So, of course, the implementation of the open source community for the software idea development technology would be a must to have for the even automobile industry.
Yeah, just because the amount of code that you have to create is so big, you got to start somewhere.
Of course, the functionality is also expanding.
Right.
It's not only GPS, but also we have to have internet connection and the multimedia players, and many things. Almost the functionality is almost the same as the smartphone.
Right. And so, you know, you've clearly chosen to use open source to address that new functionality requirement, that larger footprint of software in the car. I mean, what was that like for Nissan when you first went to your coworkers and said, hey, we've got to go with open source in the automotive industry? Were there any challenges?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Most of the people say that it's ridiculous. It's a kind of foolish thing to have the open source inside a vehicle, maybe because of the safety issue. But of course, we can keep a very good safety even if we are using open source. So that basically the mindset of the developers, even IT developers in automobile industries have a very fixed mindset, and it's quite analog. I mean, they're thinking about analog things. So I have to educate or propose and explain how the open source is good. Basically, digital and module standardization, those things are quite important to make a time to market type of introduction of the product. So that the biggest challenge for me is to change the mindset of the internal company.
Right, right. What would you, when you're trying to change that mindset, what would you say is the number one advantage of using something like MeeGo for a company like Nissan? If I'm a coworker, what do you say here? We have to use open source and MeeGo because what?
Of course, yeah. The most important thing is the time to market, and basically as I said, if we make a proprietary things, we have to do everything by ourselves, basically. But if we can comply to the open source, we can allow, we can use the many good devices and also sources or modules from outside. And expansion or expanded that progress or advantage. Anyway, those things is always there in outside the vehicle, and we can just use and combine those functionalities to make unique services for the future. And of course, we can make easy connection to the good services out there. And it may be that we can provide the future-proof services if we have a common platform with open source. Flexibility is also key.
Yeah, this is what I hear from almost everyone is that that time to market advantage, the ability to have these services very quickly on top of that open source code is critical. You focus on the user experience, right, and on providing that value, and all the other stuff you work together with other people to create.
Yes, yeah, we can focus on the value added side. Yes,
right. And you guys clearly are participating in the MeeGo project. You're working on within this. When you looked around out there, I mean, you may have looked at proprietary solutions. You may have looked at all the different open source projects that are out there. Why did you choose MeeGo as a place to participate in open source?
We believe that the direction of the MeeGo is quite right, and there are several open source projects. And but I think that MeeGo is just only the kind of project which certified automobile implementation, like in-vehicle infotainment. Other than that, other than MeeGo, we can have upgradability or backward compatibility or forward compatibility protected, so that we expect MeeGo will define a very good platform to keep some good compatibility forward and backward anyway. So that I believe that MeeGo will do that. So that we think that MeeGo's direction is quite accepted by many automobile companies or industry.
Right, and clearly there's an automotive effort going on. It's very, very focused on the requirements for that industry and sort of borrowing technologies from other sectors in order to benefit you. So it seems like a good fit for you. Danielle, you're hearing this time to market benefit. You're hearing the reasons that Nissan is using this. Are you seeing this from other sectors of technology that are similar to automotive in their adoption of open source?
I think when you look at a lot of what we may think of historically as embedded or just not necessarily compute-intensive environments, automotive, I mean, Jim, earlier you talked about, energy, smart energy. You think about home automation, home control, personal wellness, as well as telemedicine type applications. By taking advantage of open source, it's not just time to market and cost, but what that translates into for end users is just it makes the market much larger than just catering to a premium portion of the market that can afford not only the development from a device or application standpoint, but as end users, it really grows this market tremendously, because now all of a sudden you can deliver mainstream solutions at price points that are mass market. So now these things aren't just niche at the high end, but we see it across various home aspects, energy aspects, medical aspects, in terms of starting to bring these markets to the fore.
We have an audience question here. When are we going to see the first open source Nissan car? Can you tell us, or is that something you're not ready to announce today?
Yeah, of course we are preparing for that, but I can't tell.
Okay. Well, I definitely look forward to seeing a day where I can have an excuse to go out and buy a brand new Nissan because it's powered by open source software. So I think the work you guys are doing is really terrific, and I thank you so much for coming all the way from Tokyo to show us how Nissan's really leading in terms of cutting edge technology.
Yes, definitely. Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. All right. Well, that's impressive. I mean, I love cars, and I definitely love the fact that we're going to see MeeGo and open source in all of these cars in the future. So we hear from automotive, which, sounds like it's really heating up. There are these big changes in terms of what you're going to see inside of your car, what you're going to be able to do inside of your car.